Hi there. My name is Ben Loomer, and I want to welcome you to the Bloomer Report, a Learn podcast. The Bloomer Report is a chance to share conversations with educators from around Quebec working in the English school system, teachers who are leading great projects that need to be shared. My hope is that these stories will inspire similar projects that will take root across the province. Our first conversation is with Maria Raskin, a teacher I met at a Speak Up Poetry Slam hosted by the English Montreal School Board. I was amazed at the quality of student performances, and I wanted to learn more about how a teacher takes students through a process that starts with a brainstorm and then culminates in a polished, evocative performance. If you like what you hear, check out the spoken word resources on the English Language Arts section of the Learn website. It includes information about how your students can compete in a provincial poetry slam this May. So let's talk to Maria. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Ben.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk all about spoken word for the next few minutes because you have some great experience with it. So as we start, can you first start this conversation by introducing yourself and where you're teaching?
Absolutely. My name is Maria Raskin, and I'm an English language arts teacher and the head of the English language arts department at Marymount Academy International in Montreal. And I've been teaching for 5 years, and I'm very happy that I get to talk to you about slam poetry today because I've worked in several schools, and slam poetry is what I take with me everywhere I go. So I'm very happy to be able to share my experience teaching it.
Great. So as we have this conversation, one thing I was thinking about is we often talk about spoken word and slam poetry. And I was wondering if you could just give a quick definition of what spoken word and slam poetry is and kind of what the difference is between the two.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's a great question. And I think there's probably many ways to define spoken word poetry and slam poetry. Ultimately, the definition I give my students is that the difference between spoken word poems and poems we write to read is that spoken word is meant to be performed. So it's performance-based art. That's not to say that we don't spend time in the writing process. Most of our time is spent on the writing process, but really it's about how it's presented and performed. And that's taken into consideration too. For example, if we read a poem, we get chances to go back and analyze and revisit ideas that were presented. Whereas when we listen to a poem being performed, those ideas are meant to hit hard, both in the way that they're constructed and in the way that it's performed. So that's one way that I differentiate between poetry and spoken word poetry. And then the differentiation to me between slam poetry and spoken word is that slam is the competition aspect. So it's also, in my mind, tends to include the audience more. So in a regular basis, I often remind students that they're not just performing to the audience, but with the audience. It's supposed to be like a reciprocal thing. So you want the audience to feel the emotions that you're trying to convey, and you also want them to engage with you. I teach them things like how to snap when you hear something you like. They're allowed to have audible reactions. So it creates like a lot of positive, strong energy in the room. It's really empowering too for the person who's presenting to get that kind of feedback from their audience. So in short, the difference between slam poetry and spoken word poetry is that slam poetry is meant to be in a competitive space or sphere. So there is some like ranking involved, and there is like, that element of competition, which I personally really enjoy, and the students do too.
Okay, great. Makes sense to me. So I guess I was interested in what motivated you to incorporate slam poetry into the English language arts classroom.
That's a great question. Actually, I was really fortunate that when I started teaching, when I was doing my internship, I was here at Marymount, and I think the year prior was the first year that a student started this as their personal project. So I'm at an international school, and part of the international program, the IB program, is that students in grade 11 need to have their own personal project. And this student, Nayam Alem, he often comes and judges our competitions. His project was to start this competition, the slam competition at the school. So he and his cooperating teacher, who was his supervisor, who was my cooperating teacher, Maya Dugan put this together, and I was fortunate enough to be in the class the following year, and it was the first project that I was involved in with the students, which was amazing. It was in, much like this year, I think it was started in January, and I got to know the students really quickly on such an intimate level because I was working on their poems with them. And it really showed how students get to explore these ideas and get a chance to really have their voices be heard. The level of engagement that they showed blew my mind. I couldn't believe the kinds of things that they were writing, the things they were coming up with, the courage and bravery they exhibited in presenting this idea to their classmates, the support they provided for each other. And it really inspired me. Like I really saw how meaningful writing could be in real time for students, which was something that was already very meaningful to me. I've written personally since I was in high school. So to see them engage in something that I'm passionate in like that was just really inspiring and encouraging. And I wanted to continue doing that. So at Marymount, since then, every year from grade 8 to grade 11, students do this spoken word poetry unit. And like I said, I've brought it to other schools, and it's been just as successful.
Great. Just off the top of your head, what are some of the themes that you find that students often write about or do spoken word about?
Spoken word lends itself very well to themes of injustice. And it's something that a lot of teens, a lot of adolescents can relate to. And that could be like on a macro or a micro level. For some, they talk a lot about personal struggles that they've overcome. A lot of them talk about experiences or events or obstacles within their family life, their home life, romantic issues, friendships. They talk about issues like bullying. Some talk about things like addiction and crime. Some even go like more on a global level, talk about things like wealth inequality or environmental issues. So it's quite a grand scope. The topics tend to be of more serious nature. It really delves into like the issues that students are encountering and how they don't normally have an outlet to be able to discuss it or present it in a way that showcases their strength versus their weakness in the face of these issues or conflicts. So very wide variety. And then every so often there are some more comedic poems or some more, I had a student once write about his love for books. I have students now who are writing about video games and coding. So it's definitely a large scope. There's a lot of room, but definitely think frustration tends to be an emotion that's normally channeled through this unit.
Okay, great. Thank you. So one of the reasons why we're having this conversation is this hope that more and more teachers will get involved in introducing spoken word into the classroom. Mm-hmm. So I guess I was wondering, for the benefit of educators interested in bringing spoken word into the class, can you share kind of a general outline of the unit? Kind of what is the journey that you take your students on from introduction of spoken word to a final performance?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I always start by kind of both creating excitement and enthusiasm for this while also dispelling fear, because there seems to be like this association with the word poems and poetry that is very negative for a lot of students. So I try to make it more relevant for them by talking to them about things that they're familiar with, like rap. I try to give them examples of how poetry is often found in song lyrics. So I make it something that's relatable to things that they're already engaging with. And then we look at a lot of examples. The beginning of our unit is analysis and discussion. And this also lends itself very well to brainstorming. So as we look at different examples of different poems, not only are we looking at what makes this a successful poem, how is the message being communicated, what is the speaker feeling, and how do we know? We're also thinking about what's the topic, and do you relate to this topic, and have you ever experienced these things? So it creates a nice overlap for us to segue into the writing. And then the writing, I am slowly developing into 3 phases because I've noticed that a large part is just the brainstorming. And then students need to get more comfortable with just writing a poem. A lot of them ask, like, how do I start? So just getting them to get used to putting ideas down on the page is a definite step. So even like writing prompts and exercises, encouraging them to share their work as they go, whether they intend to keep it or not. And then there is also significant attention paid to the editing process and revision. And some of that is individual, some of that is workshopping with me, some of that is peer feedback and peer editing. And then they submit their final poem and they perform.
Great. And I guess through that process, can you maybe touch upon any key assignments or artifacts that you use when you assess these poems in the ELA context?
For sure, yeah. So one thing that I really like this unit for is that it gives you a lot of chances to evaluate the talk competency, communicating through talk, which often can be a struggle to find ways to evaluate that. But through getting them to brainstorm their ideas, even through analysis, discussing poems with each other, I have analysis worksheets that I have them complete as we look at poems. So we use that. I have them brainstorm very early on about what they might want to write about, which is always subject to change. But that also gives me a chance to record what their thoughts are and track their progress. The cool thing with this unit is that it's progress-based. So I'm assessing them along the way, both formatively and then summatively as well. So I also evaluate their draft, and I look for the fact that they're editing, they're learning how to use line breaks and divide their ideas up into different stanzas. So there's the editing, the draft. I collect that. I give them a mark on that with feedback. And then I'm marking both their physical poem, the copy of their poem, as well as their actual performance. So the analysis is also the reading competency. So we have all three competencies in one unit, which is pretty cool and pretty rare, but it happens very organically.
And I guess in general, how long is the spoken word unit?
That's a great question. In general, I have condensed it in as quick as a cycle and a half. So that's about 3 weeks. So it is possible to do in 3 weeks if everybody is present and very engaged. But it can go for as long as like 6 to 8 weeks. It really depends on the students in the class too, and how long they take to come up with ideas, the time spent on the revision process. But the unit is very malleable. It's very conducive to being able to adjust it according to what your time constraints are. So you can I like fitting it in normally between the holiday break, December, and exam week, which is generally like last week of January. So normally I can do it in those 3 weeks. Sometimes we do the presentations when they can come back from exams, but that's generally his timeline.
Okay, thanks. So what are some of the reactions or some of the feedback that you get from students that engage in spoken word? What are some of the things that they've said that stands out to you?
I'm always happily surprised by their reactions to each other. So they'll often say things like, I didn't realize that someone else was also experiencing this, or I never thought this person would see things this way. So they do get a chance to see things about each other that they might have overlooked or not considered before. Which I think is really cool. It's really nice that they get to know each other in a different light. Some of them get really excited. They really like this ability to be creative in class. There's not always tons of room for creative assignments, so focusing so heavily on one feels really rewarding for a lot of them. A lot of them are surprised by how empowering it is to get through the presentation process. So students are always reluctant to present, as I'm sure every teacher can attest to. It's very nerve-wracking, although it is an essential skill. And once they get the chance to speak about something that often they feel quite vulnerable about in a way that's received so positively, they're often pleasantly surprised by how good that feels, how it's kind of like a relief for them to get through that.
Great. And that actually kind of leads to my next question, which is, as you mentioned, spoken word poems often deal with personal or difficult topics. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for other teachers around creating a safe and respectful space for students when they work on this unit?
That's a really good question. It's really important that students feel like they can share what they've gone through or their experiences and be supported and not judged by their classmates. I find like English class is is a really good space for this, because often we're talking about themes that ask students to reflect on their own experiences with these various ideas or life stages. I always set the tone by outlining my expectations and outlining them in such a way that is assuming that they will be able to follow through on those, previewing their poems individually, discussing with them ahead of time, also gives you a chance to have any discussions that need to be had to make sure everybody is okay. It's important to, spoken word is often when I'm having discussions about, like, here are other resources that you can use and access. We always make that announcement before the competition too, of, if anybody feels like these are themes that they're struggling with or want to talk to somebody with, here are the resources within your school and outside your school that you have access to, and your teachers are there for you. So opening up that form of communication is really important. Having everyone present and everyone encourage each other in the same way. So the snapping, as I mentioned, having everybody engage with each other in that way sets a really nice, like, even playing field. Sometimes I'll allow students to have a friend or myself stand with them while they're performing their poem to give them the moral support, especially if it's like an emotional topic, and that's really helpful. So creating that environment is very important, and it can be done through various ways. It also allows you as the teacher to create a deeper bond with students, and that lends itself well in so many other aspects of the classroom as well. Normally we don't encounter any problems with the younger students. Sometimes there is the nervousness that gets in the way. So I'll address that as well. Like, sometimes when we're nervous, we giggle, and that's okay. We just want to make sure that we're not giggling when someone else is presenting, because that could make us feel less comfortable sharing our ideas. So, like, really tackling all of the emotions is to me the best way of making sure everybody feels safe and comfortable and supported.
Great. Thanks. So I guess that's about it for all the questions I was thinking about. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you think teachers would want to know about with the experience, or would help them introduce this into their classroom?
So this year this is my 5th year teaching it, I guess. And one thing I've noticed after teaching it several times is that a lot of students can write pretty good poems. Like, a lot of us, when we sit down and we have an idea and we spend enough time, we can write something that's pretty decent. But taking it to the next level really has to do with how honest and open they're willing to be, and focusing on certain technical aspects. So as the teacher, I'm really trying to focus more on this year, focusing on certain elements for each level. So, for example, with my secondary 4 students, we're working on how to create pattern through repetition, and how that can help us reinforce our point, and how repeating a sound or word or idea and how it changes throughout the course of the poem can help the audience understand what we mean. For the secondary 5s, we're working on juxtaposition and creating tension in a poem. So I would encourage, for the first time, I think let's just try to write a poem with some poetic devices that communicates emotion and about a message. I think that's like a very worthy goal. But thinking about the specific points in terms of evaluation, what am I really looking for, and how will the students show that they can do this and replicate this? I think that makes for more tangible writing goals, and that's probably true across the board. I had just never really thought about it until this year until this year about how it could translate to spoken word.
Great. Anything else that stands out, or you would want to share?
No, I just really hope more teachers are willing to take this on. It's really, really fun. It's great. It's great to have this insight on students, their perspective, their lives, coming directly from them. That's not always, I think it's more common in English than maybe in other subjects, just because of the nature of the course that students are writing about themselves more. But that's really amazing. And I've seen every year, there's always at least one student that really surprises me. It's normally like a student that is not always as engaged in their learning, or maybe a student who's more reserved. And it gives the opportunity for students like that to really shine and grow. And not only is that good for them academically, but even socially, like, it gives them this kind of reputation with their peers that they might not have had before. So I think it's really worth it. It's a really fun unit.
Great. Well, Maria, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share all this with us. And I also agree. Let's hope lots of teachers get involved in bringing this into their schools.
Yeah, let's bring on the competition.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure sharing these ideas with you.
Great. Thanks again.